Within the past 2 hours, President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wrapped up their meeting at Mar-a-Lago. Netanyahu saying Trump will, quote, receive awards as they came to a lot of conclusions. Let's bring in my co-anchor now, Todd McDermott, who's just across the water from Mar-a-Lago. And Todd, two major topics were discussed during today's meeting.
Felicia, that's right. They are Gaza, but also Iran. No resolution was announced today, no breakthroughs on speeding up the slow process to get to the second phase of the peace plan for Gaza. But President Trump expressed optimism. He did much the same thing yesterday, the same optimistic tone after his meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky regarding ending Russia's war on Ukraine, expressing optimism, but with no breakthroughs achieved. He spent today this afternoon with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, as you said, talking about peace in Gaza, but also issuing a threat to Iran again. The two leaders focused on the threat to Israel posed by Iran and peace in Gaza, including the next phase of that ceasefire, and those still simmering tensions with Iran. President Trump warning Tehran against reconstructing its nuclear program, promising to bomb them again, as U.S. forces did back in June. Now, President Trump has insisted Tehran's nuclear capabilities were, quote, completely and fully obliterated. You remember those terms used by the Secretary of Defense and the President after U.S. strikes on key nuclear enrichment sites in June. Iran insists it is not enriching uranium now for nuclear weapons now. But Israeli officials have been quoted in the news media expressing concern about Iran rebuilding its ballistic missile, long-range missile supply, missiles capable of hitting Israel. And we know he talked to the president about that today. Two men also talking about that elusive second phase of the ceasefire in Gaza, the agreement reached in October. This phase is much more complicated with the first, which has not been completed officially. It involves rebuilding Gaza, forming that board of peace of which the president would be the chair and other nations would take part, as well as forming a Palestinian government, an overseeing government for day-to-day operations in Gaza, as well as laying the groundwork, a path for a Palestinian authority, a Palestinian state, something neither Netanyahu or his allies on the right in Israel are at all happy with. Netanyahu called today's meeting very productive.
He's achieved remarkable things in the Middle East because we work together. We talk about our ideas. Sometimes we have different ideas, but we work it out. And most of the time we see eye to eye. But it's been a remarkable experience, and this was a very, very productive meeting. And may I say, a very good lunch. Thank you.
Well, I'm not concerned about anything that Israel's doing. I'm concerned about what other people are doing or maybe aren't doing. But I'm not concerned. They've lived up to the plan.
The president talking there about Hamas, which under the agreement has to disarm its fighters. However, it's shown no sign it will do so. There have been vague hints about freezing its weapons or storing its weapons, but no sign they will disarm, as required by the 20-point peace plan that the president and others signed back in October. And again, they're meeting to discuss the peace in Gaza. Supporters outside the grounds of Mar-a-Lago at the same time were pushing for the release and return of the remains of the last Israeli hostage held by Hamas. Netanyahu has said there will be no progress in peace for Gaza until that actually happens. And today, the Israeli victims' parents were there at Mar-a-Lago. Angela Rozier joins me now live with that part of the story today. Angela?
You know, Todd, I also want to tell you there was lots of security presence here outside Mar-a-Lago. There was always security present, but there was additional presence here today during that meeting. And as you say, we got a chance to talk to an Israeli official here today. He also hoping for peace and closure for that family.
Well, for us, it's all about peace. For Israel, it's always about peace.
Talks about peace in Gaza took place here inside Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach Monday afternoon. A member of the Prime Minister's office who spoke with reporters outside says this was a historic fifth visit that the Prime Minister has made to see President Trump, and it symbolizes the closeness of the two countries. He stressed the goal is to not only bring peace to the region by making sure that Hamas is disarmed, but also for the president to help them find a way to recover the remains of the last deceased hostage, Ron Villay. His parents traveled to South Florida with the Prime Minister on the plane.
On October the 7th, he ran in to try and save people. He saved many people. He killed many terrorists, but he was killed on that day, and his dead body was unfortunately pulled back into Gaza by the terrorists.
He wants President Trump to work closely with the prime minister to achieve their goals.
President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu believe in the same thing. They say peace through strength. It's only when the US and Israel are strong that's when our enemies come towards us to make peace.
And again, he stresses the president and the prime minister work closely together, and they're both doing that today as they strive for peace. Reporting live in Palm Beach, Angela Rozier, WPBF 25 News.
Angela, thank you again. President Trump, popular in Israel. The prime minister, not as popular. He does face an election next year. The president said today that without him and Netanyahu, Israel would not exist. Meanwhile, local clergy talking about the meeting today, both Muslim and Jewish leaders talking about this. Yasmin Julmus joins me live to talk about their response to today's meeting at Mar-a-Lago. Yasmin?
Good evening, Todd. Right now I'm at the Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens, and as you mentioned, both Jewish and Muslim leaders commenting today on the meeting between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump. They are disagreeing on the basis of the war, but agreeing that they eventually want to see peace. At the Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens, while Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Donald Trump about 16 miles away, Rabbi David Vigler is reacting to the meeting between the world leaders and the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, primarily over the Middle East territory.
The land of Israel is the only country in the world that's called the Promised Land, because it is the only land on earth that is promised by God Almighty to the Jewish people. It is not ours to give it away. It is not ours to share it with other people.
Leaders with the Council of American Islamic Relations, also known as CAIR, disagree.
For us, we want obviously peace in the Middle East. We want the world and America and Israel to recognize the rights of Palestinians to self-determination and independence. It is the self-right that allowed Israel to establish their state. That is the same right of the Palestinians.
In terms of today's meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, Rabbi Vigler says he's hoping there will be some progress toward an end to the war.
Starting today, maybe starting at this meeting between the president and the prime minister, of a world in which all human beings can be respected, to be given the life, the liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is endowed by our Creator for all human beings.
Attorney Wilfredo Ruiz says that can only happen if Palestinian voices are included in the peace talks.
If we will truly want peace, we need to bring the actors, specifically the over 3.5 million Palestinians that live in the West Bank and in Gaza, bring their representatives to the table.
And since the war began just a little over 2 years ago in October of 2023, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health, more than 67,000 people have been killed in Gaza. According to Israeli officials, more than 2,000 people have been killed in Israel. In Palm Beach Gardens, Yasmin Julmus, WPBF 25 News.
Yasmin, thank you so much. This fifth and final meeting between the president and prime minister of 2025 concluded with the president saying he believes that phase 2 of that peace plan for Gaza will begin, quote, soon. And that ends 2 important days for U.S. diplomacy conducted all right across the water on Palm Beach. For now, I'm Todd McDermott, live across Mar-a-Lago. Let's go back to Felicia in the studio.